Welcome to part 6 of the Excel VBA Real Examples series. Well done for getting this far. I hope you're excited about how things are coming together. Let's get back into the download file. As we can see, we've got our list of unique entries. We're pretty happy with this list. We've tested it a number of different ways in the previous video, so we can now move on. What do we need to do next? Well, we've got to think about populating these columns, because we know that Alfred is on one of these sheets, at least one of these sheets, but he might be on one of the other sheets as well. So again, we've got to work with those loops we've created, and we're going to populate this table. How many times does each of these customers appear on each sheet? I'm just going to head over to the other side of the screen there. So this is the code we're working with. Now, I have figured that we don't need to do it with this conditional statements. We don't need any code in this part of the conditional statement here. So we can simplify the code here a bit, make things a little bit easier. We can simplify it by simply saying, well, if D3 equals 0, then we want to do this. We can take the else out of the conditional statement. That's just going to simplify things a little bit for us. What it's saying is if the value in D3, so which tells us if a name already appears or not in this list, if the value is 0, then we want to add this name to the list. Now let's put an annotation in there to remind us. We want to add name to list. So just a simplification there, that's going to help us in the next stage. So this is a bit of a kind of big step forward we're going to make. So if you feel you've got to make a big step forward, what have we got to do? Well, we've got to take a step back and try to think conceptually, clearly in our own heads, what techniques are going to help us here. Try to literally talk through it out loud. You'll see me in my office just walking round and round, talking through things. That's because I'm trying to get the concepts clear in my head. So what we need to tell Excel is the position of the name in the database. The position of the name in the database. Because these names are appearing on more than one sheet, then Excel is going to have to deal with them more than one time when it's working through this routine. So we can't just say, oh, when you put the name in, also put it into a column. That's not going to work because the name might occur again later. So we need something more sophisticated than that. We need a mechanism to tell Excel how far down the list, how far down this list does each name appear. You might want to stop the video. What mechanism do we have available to that? Again, there's always more than one different way. Let's use a worksheet formula because that's been our approach so far. Let's use a worksheet formula to tell us the position in the list of a particular name. And we're going to use, well, what formula do you want to use here? Let's use match. Match tells us how far down a range a particular value appears. This is the value that we want to match. What's the lookup array? Well, it's going to start here, but then we're going to cell 2000 here. Now this is a weakness of our approach. If you had a data set that went beyond the 2000th row, then this mechanism would simply stop working. So you've got to think very carefully at the beginning of the task, what is the scope of this task? How many rows might I possibly need? There's a balance to be drawn because, you know, we could say 200,000 rows, but that would make the formulae less efficient. That would mean it would work for a lot of different cases, but would make the formulae less efficient. So we've got to find the right balance. 2000 is about right in this case. That would be something I would be monitoring on an ongoing basis. And then 0 is fine for the exact match there. So that tells us where Stephanie is. One thing I know is going to happen, I'm just going to go and check that Stephanie's there. Stephanie Hall, is second bottom in the list there. You can see in your screenshot. So that seems to make sense. She's 48th of 49 entries. That makes sense to us. So, but one thing I know is going to happen from experience, when there's no value here, then we're going to get this error, and probably, if you're anything like me, you don't like seeing errors on spreadsheets. So let's just put an if formula in here to say, okay, only try to do this matching if the name already appears in the database. We're going to get formulae working together, synergizing together to create magic, as we're going to see. So we can say if the name already appears in the list, just going to hit the F2 key. if the name already appears in the list, so if D3 equals 1, we want to do the matching. If D3 doesn't equal 1, then we're just going to say don't do anything there. Okay, good, fine. So now if there's nothing in this cell here, then we've managed to avoid that error message in cell D5. Okay, so we've got a formula to tell us the position of the name in the list. How is that going to help us? Well, it's going to help us populate this table. And so, but we've also got to think about which of the columns do we want to populate. And we're not going to do that now, but that's something just ticking over in the back of your mind. What mechanism might we use to get Excel looking at the right column there? Okay, so what do we need to do? Right, we want the name to be added to the list. We're happy with that. We want that to continue, the name to be added to the list. One thing to bear in mind is when this routine runs again, the names won't be in alphabetical order. You'll remember in the previous video, I kind of manually sorted the names into alphabetical order. So maybe that's something you could put into the code. You could record the code to do that, for example. I'm not going to do it in this series. So when we run the code, the names aren't going to be in alphabetical order. That's something for us to bear in mind. Okay, and then we want the name to go in, and then we want a value to appear in this column. So if the name appears, then we want a number to appear in this column, a number 1. So in the TX column there. So we can say, well, you might want to stop the video and think about how you might do this. We're going to say sheets analysis. And then we need to control position here. So what technique might we use? We're going to be using offset, of course, because we're trying to control position. Going to use C7 as our anchor cell. In fact, let's use D7 for now, though we might change that later. And then we've got to think about how we're going to control this offset once we've put the syntax in properly, of course. Okay. So the offset, right, the offset has 2 components. First, how many rows to go down, then how many columns to go across. Remember, we've just created a mechanism to help us define how many rows to go down. So we could use the approach that we previously used. I'm just going to comment this out to stop the error message coming up. We could use the method we used previously, where we just put the sheet reference in there. But I'm going to use a different way this time, just to show you 2 different ways, because this is quite kind of, I'd say, typing heavy, we could say. This is a long line of code, and this could be difficult to work with, difficult to debug for you and for other people later. So an alternative would be to declare a variable and then to put the row position value into a variable, then use that variable in the offset method. That we're going to do that in a second. Don't worry if that doesn't make sense. Just stay with me. So let's say row position. I'm going to say row position. This is going to be an integer variable. It's going to be a whole number. And then, yeah, before this line of code, we can say row position. Okay, I'm just thinking about this a second. Yes, this should work. So row position equals the analysis sheet, and then what cell are we talking here? Row position is D5. Dot range, of course. There we go, D5 dot value. Okay, now one thing, just a little aside here that's important. You'll notice I keep repeating the sheet reference here. Now that's not absolutely necessary if we're working on this sheet, okay? You could assume this is going to be the active sheet, but what's the downside of that? Well, the downside is if it wasn't the active sheet, everything would go wrong. So generally, it's good practice to include the sheet reference. That means whatever sheet the user is on, our routine is going to work. Okay, so we've got the value from the match formula, cell D5, allocated that to this row position variable. Now we can use the row position variable with offset to get this position mechanism working using less typing. So it's going to look a bit easier to understand. Right, let's pop row position in here. Okay, then where's our starting point? Column D. So let's just say 0 and then dot value equals. Just going to skip over to the other side of the screen here. There we go, dot value equals 1. Okay, so what's going to happen now? What I want to see is some 1s appearing in column D. In fact, it's going to loop through all of the names, and then when a name appears, hopefully it's going to put a 1 in column D in this cell. But to test it, what do? Well, let's clear out the pre-existing data, Control S, save the file, and then let's just step through the code as usual. Make sure you get this set up where you can see the VBA editor and Excel on the screen at the same time. 2 screens certainly helps. Make sure you've got that set up. Okay, so let's see what happens here. Okay, we've got a name at the top of the in row 7 there. So I'm going to test this line of code here. So row position equals 1. That makes sense. So what I'm doing, I'm just positioning the cursor over the variable. Position the cursor over the variable, the arrow over the variable. That means Excel tells us the value of the variable. A good debugging tip there. Right, so what are we expecting to happen? We're going to start in C7. We're going to move away by a value of 1. So we're not quite accurate here. And then that value is going to equal 1. So I'm expecting 1 to appear in cell D8, which isn't quite accurate. Okay, and there's our 1 there. Okay, so a good example of why you absolutely have to work through things step by step like that. This wasn't absolutely accurate. So let's work from cell D6 instead. Okay, Control S, save the file, then F8 key running through the code. Okay, we've got a value there. I'm happy with that. F8 key, working through the code, second name in, and we've got a value of 1 there. I'm happy with that. Okay, going through again, all the way through the code. At this point, I'm just going to hit the play button. That means Excel will execute the remainder of the routine. Okay, and we've got our names in there. We can see we've got 49 names in the list. I'm just going to go down to the bottom of the list quickly just to test that. Okay, just outside your screenshot, yeah, I can see there's 49 names there. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm just going to go to the bottom of the list so you can see it there. Correct this formatting issue. Control C, Control Alt V T, so the formats are consistent there. Okay, so again, you might be thinking, but Chris, all we've got is the names and then a number 1 there. Absolutely, we're not there yet. Why is the mechanism not working? Well, the mechanism is not moving across for each sheet in the file. Yeah. At the moment, we're just overwriting the values in column D. What we want to do is move across 1 column for each sheet in the file. So again, you might want to stop the video. How are we going to do that? It's just using offset, using position control, as you would have seen many times on the channel. Right, what part of the code are we particularly interested in here? Well, we've already talked about the row position. We've set up the mechanism with the match formula. We're happy with that. So what about this 0 here? This 0 is controlling our lateral positioning. So how many columns do we want to go across? And really, this is probably the most critical point in the whole series. Can you work out how to make this work dynamically? Yeah, we don't have to introduce anything new now. We can use existing features, existing things in the code to make this work. So stop the video, have a think about that. Well, remember right at the beginning, we used this technique, the sheet's index number, to help us loop through the sheets. So this counter variable increases by 1 each time we go through the code. Now, that's interesting for us. We can harness that to achieve our positioning, to effectively move across these columns as we move across the sheets. This is what we can do. So let's do it, and let's intentionally get it wrong first. But let's get it wrong in a way we understand, and then maybe we can get it right. Okay, just a small change to the code there. We're taking this counter variable, and again, we've got a variable working with offset to do dynamic positioning. This is such a common technique, super powerful. Right, let's just clear out the existing data and then save the file, Control S. I'm just going to hit the F5 key now, and then what do we get here? Okay, chaos. Absolute chaos here. Okay, so something seems to have happened. Yeah, something seems to have happened, but the positioning isn't quite right. But I did say we're going to get it wrong first, but in a way that we understand, in a way that helps us understand. So what has happened here? Well, let's just do it again. And forgive me for going quite slowly, but there'll be people who are just picking this up for the first time. And let's try to understand what's happening. So hitting the F8 key, you can go debug and step into. Hitting the F8 key on the Windows PC. Right, so we've got our name in there, row position, we've got a value in the row position variable. But why does our value end up all the way over here? Well, let's look at the value of the variables. We're happy with the row position variable, that's 1. What about this counter variable? Well, counter is 3. Why is the value 3? Well, that's how we defined the loop at the beginning of the routine. Remember, way back in the first video, weeks ago, we defined this. It should be 3 at first. So it starts at 3, and then it's going to go up to the number of sheets in the workbook, and we have 6 sheets in the workbook. So this variable is going to start at 3, go through the loop, 4, go through the loop, 5, go through the loop, 6, go through the loop, then it's going to exit. So what we need to do is adjust the value to shift these values across. Shift these values back across. I think when we ran the code, in fact, let's run the code once more, just to get this view again. F5 key, run the code. Okay. So we just need to shift these values across by 1, 2, 3 cells. How might we do that? Again, this is a critical point, I think, in the series. How might we do that? Shift these values across. We just need to adjust the counter variable. It's as simple as saying counter minus 3, I think. Let's test it and give it a go. Clear out the existing data. And then Control S. Okay, save the file. F5 key, going to run the code here. Okay, and this is exactly what we were looking for. Yeah, so all of the customers on the Texas sheet, the TX sheet, they're appearing there. And all of the customers on the other sheets, yeah, they've got a 1 in the cell there. Okay, now I'm just wondering if this is going to be accurate or if we want to just introduce one more thing. We're assuming that each name only appears once per sheet if we have this approach. So for completeness, we should bear in mind that maybe the name appears more than once on the sheet. If that's the case, then rather than just inputting a value of 1, we actually want to increment the value up by 1. That's the change I just made to the code. This line of code is saying increase the value in that cell by 1. So if somebody appears twice, it's going to go from 1 to 2, 3 times from 2 to 3. That allows us to account for situations where a name appears on the same sheet more than one time. Don't get lost in the detail. If you didn't understand that at all, don't worry too much about it. You can just copy along with me there. Right, let's play the code one more time, just doing a quick sense check. Looks reasonable. F5 key, in fact, clear out the data first. We really should have a mechanism automate this process of clearing out the code. Maybe we'll get onto that before the end of the series. F5 key. Okay, we've got our values in there. Now, I can't see any 2s in there, so I think we should be okay in terms of names appearing more than once time on the sheet. I don't think they actually do. And let's just make this formatting consistent at the bottom there. Good. So, what is this table telling us? Let's just remind ourselves. This table is telling us, yeah, we've got all these names in the file. I'm going to flip over to the other side. This table is telling us, okay, how many times do these names appear in the file? Okay, so Henry, for example, appears on the Texas sheet, on the NYC sheet, and on the AZ sheet. Okay, so you should be saying to me, but Chris, I don't believe that. You know, never believe what Excel is telling us. If we've just programmed it to tell us that, we've got to test it. How might we test it another way? Well, we're going to go through at least one way of testing it. I'm going to take this value, Luna Haminja, which is the name of my dog, who's not with us at the moment. I'm going to take this value and I'm going to go home. and then we'll go to, I wonder where it's gone, find and select. These options do move around Excel a bit. We're going to go home. This will look small on your screen, but you'll be able to do it. Home, find and select, and then find. And then I'm going to just copy paste in Luna Haminja there. Okay, now hopefully that's a little bit small on your screen, but I'm just using find and replace. You can Google Excel find and replace to find out how to do that if you couldn't quite see it on my screen recording. Then we've hit options, we're going to go to within workbook. Okay, so this very nice facility in Excel, it's going to tell us how many times the value appears and then where it appears in the file as well. Really useful for us. We're expecting Luna to appear once on the TX sheet, once on the MO sheet. If that's not the case, then we've got to, then our code is wrong, we're going to have to go through it. Right, so find all. We're actually seeing 3 occurrences here. Well, we're seeing 4 occurrences here. Okay, yeah, but that seems to make sense. Right, so she appears once on the analysis sheet, twice on the use indirect sheet. So I'm not absolutely sure why that is. Maybe we'll check that in a second. But crucially, yes, she appears once on the TX customer sheet, once on the MO customer sheet. So I'm happy about that. Okay, let's test the next one. Alison Brandt. So we're expecting her to appear, yeah, on the Texas sheet and the AZ sheet, which I think is Arizona. Alt-H, FDF. Alt-H, FDF. Find and replace shortcut on the Windows PC. Find all. And what have we got here? Let me just get this into your screenshot. Okay, yeah, Alison Brandt, she appears once on the TX sheet and once on the AZ sheet. Okay, so I'm happy with that. How else might we check this? Well, you'll remember we've got this use indirect sheet. I'm going to the use indirect sheet here. Okay, now this is why the names were appearing twice when we were doing the find, looking at the find, using the find function there. We can delete these names now, but at the bottom of this sheet, let's go down to the bottom, you can see I've put the totals in here, okay, so there's a total of 40 names on the first sheet, 28, and then 38 and 39. So these totals should be the same. So let's go to the analysis sheet and let's check it out. So we can just say, go to the bottom here, bring this into your screenshot. Let's say equals sum. Then I'm going to use the cursors here, use the arrows. I'm going to go back up to the top. Okay, so I'm happy with that formula. So we've got 40 first. Then I'm just going to autofill right, keyboard shortcut, Control R. So we've got 40, 28, 38, 39. Is that the same as indirect? Let's do the same thing 2 different ways in order to test the accuracy. And indirect, we've got 40, 28, 38, 39, 40, 28, 38, 39. So, phew, thank goodness. We went through all that testing and it looks like our mechanism is working. So we've got those unique entries, a table with unique entries telling us how many times each name appears on each sheet. We're now ready to move forward, further forward with this everyday VBA task.